how to get there, your action plan as we kind of got started in the discussion over this. We kind of described this. We used the analogy of a triptych. Anybody remember the old AAA triptychs? Anybody remember those? Am I the only old one who did triptychs? Yeah, you used to go to AAA before Google Maps. You used to go to AAA, and you would go and you'd say, I want to get from here to Orlando. And they would give you a triptych. It was a bound thing, and each one had a little section of map. And remember, the kind helper would yellow all the areas where there was construction currently going on and all of those things. Huh? You're dating us? Hey, we all know where we are. We don't want to admit it, but we all know where we are. And so that was the goal of this session, and that's what we're hoping to give you a little picture of. You've got some handouts that are coming around that hopefully will be helpful to you. And so just wanted to try to help you think through, okay, where are we at? Where do we go from here? What are some of the key stopping points? What are some of the things that need to be hit? Where's the giant ball of twine that we need to make sure and stop at and see, because there's lots of excitement along the journey. So I think Kathy, are you coming first? Okay, Kathy's going to come, and she's going to share with you.
Hello. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. This is, I think, the first conference that the ASF has had where we're focusing the entire day on adult services. So I think the goal of all of us is we don't want any of you to leave here with questions. So don't be scared, don't hesitate. If you have a question, almost anybody else in the audience will also have that same question. So just keep that in mind, that we are here to help you and guide you, and that's why we're here today. So this is just kind of an overview of services that's kind of my experience in getting services. Sometimes they're very difficult to find, to get. In my personal experience, I called CMH. I live in Michigan, and once you get into services in Michigan, they're really good. They're really helpful. It's just getting into them that's difficult, and that might be in every state. So what I had to do was I had to start calling around. I had to call the Developmental Disability Council. Every state should have one. They told me what waivers to ask for. Every state has a parent training information center that you can utilize. And oftentimes these agencies work in conjunction with, in Michigan, it's community mental health, whatever agency provides your waiver services. These agencies that I'm telling you about are national agencies, and they will know who you should contact. The local disability network, it's been mentioned a lot. I use the resource, Your Local ARC is always a great resource. So once you get the number, you're going to call your local mental health agency, and you're going to get assigned a case manager. That case manager is your gateway to services. So when I first started getting case management, we were through an agency, and my case manager was the one that taught me how to run services. My kids are now on the self-determination program, but at the time, the case manager taught me everything that I needed to know to have my kids have a full life and a productive life and live in their own home. So agencies are really beneficial to start out with. And another thing I want to make clear is there's no wrong choice for you guys. If you don't choose self-determination, that's fine. If you choose a group home, if you choose a supported living situation, whatever is right for your family is the right answer. Once you get into CMH services, you have choices between community living supports, the rehabilitation support waiver, or respite. And in Michigan, we have all three. You also have choices to think about, like, do you want the supports in their parents' home? Do you want them to live in their own home? Or do you want them to live in a group home or now supported living situations where you have roommates. So there's a lot of choices there. Your last choice, well, not your last choice, but another choice you have to make is if you want an agency model or a self-determination model. The self-determination model requires a little bit of training, and some states call it consumer-directed services. I don't know if consumer-directed services require more work if you place your child in a group home, but I can tell you from personal experience that if it's not a part-time job, it's a full-time job. So there are some ins and outs to that you probably need to know. So that's my overview of services.
Thanks, Kathy and Todd. We are all parents. If we didn't all introduce ourselves, my name is Pat Hornbecker. I'm from San Francisco, California, and I have been working with the ARC of San Francisco for most of my son's life. My son is the oldest of my 4 children. He has Angelman syndrome. He is 39 years old, and I have 3 daughters, 35, 28, and 26, I think. I have worked with the ARC of San Francisco, the ARC of California, and the ARC of the United States for most of the last 35 years to be the guiding force for services for my son. Because he's 39, there was no Angelman syndrome then. So he was a kid with no label going through the school system in San Francisco, which was fine with me because then I designed the entire program and they couldn't argue with me that he didn't fit in a nice little box for Down syndrome kids or kids with autism or kids with whatever. That was kind of how I started in an infant program getting into the school system and was introduced to the ARC as probably a service agency that only provided services to adults. But they connected me to local agencies that provided services, advocacy services to family members of kids in school. So that was my original connection. And in California, we have the Lanterman Act, which is an entitlement law that is the only state that has one. But as a result, every person in California is entitled to services. And so those of you from California have a case manager at your regional center. They know what services you're eligible for. Now, just like school systems, they don't always tell you what all the services are because they are going to have to pay for them. My son is a waiver kid, and they didn't tell me till he was 18 years old. Well, that's because those waiver funds don't kick in till you become an adult at age 18. And then I realized that, so now he makes his own decisions, which they often will tell you when you're in the school system too. All of a sudden your son or daughter turns 18 and they say, well, by the way, we're not inviting you to the IEP anymore. And they go, what? And they say, well, he's an adult. He can sign his own IEP. And I went, have you met my son? And I'm not being sarcastic or flip, but all of us know we talk about self-determined services, we talk about conservatorships and guardianships, and we talk about supported decision-making, and we know what that means. We talk about assisted technology. There's a whole track of communication going on down around the corner about assistive technology for communication. We know as family members of people with Angelman syndrome that is a very, very slippery slope. And if you do not manage it well, you will find that the agency is making the decision, not the individual with Angelman syndrome, and not you. So in the school system, I learned very early on that all you have to do is if they're going to accept your son's signature on an IEP, they're also going to accept it on a letter that says, to whom it may concern, my mother will represent me for all educational and service programs for the rest of his life, period. And they said, what? I said, well, that's what he wrote it. If he signed that IEP, you were going to enforce that. And if you, and in California we have an IPP, which is the next level. It's the adult service program. And so we have an individual program plan, IPP, which is just like you've been writing IEPs for your entire life. And what happens then is they have to accept that same signature. Now in other states, though, you might have some kickback. And so as Kathy's map that she was going through takes you through the school system and you move into the adult world, you start talking about guardianships and powers of attorney and the individual making their own decisions. And those are very tricky ways of doing it, but it is manageable. I had Joseph conserved. And, well, conserved is, I think you call it guardianship here in Kentucky. And some people think that I have violated all of his rights by taking them away, because he no longer can make the decisions that he would make all by himself. Well, if he was left to make all of his decisions all by himself, that would be a very interesting picture, and any of the parents in this room know what that means. So I had him conserved at 21, or before he became 21 years old, so that I knew he could live independently, but that the service agencies that were going to have to work with him or he was going to have to engage with, were going to do what was necessary for him to have a quality life living in California. Because when you get out of the school system, you're jumping into a whole new world, a whole new set of language, and a new set of agencies. I mean, not like the school system wasn't trouble enough for 22 years. But now you're dealing with Social Security, you're dealing with, you're making a transition from pediatric to adult medical care. My son was with his pediatrician until she was 20 years old. And she sat down with me and she goes, "Pat, I have something to tell you. I'm retiring." "Oh, thank God, because I was going to tell you we were breaking up anyway." And she goes, "What?" And I said, "Well, I found a colleague of yours that will provide adult services as an internist to Joseph at UCSF, and that's usually a good place to go as a university. And she provides services to all people with IDD in her practice." And so I broke up with our pediatrician, and it was, if any of us know what that is, it's a very big thing. I cried. We cried, and we had a drink. But anyway, what was really, these are the other agencies that you're having to work with. So the Medicaid issues, how you're going to get your medical care. Joseph was living, Social Security. So Social Security, of course, before 18, they said he was not disabled enough. And I went, "Really?" Or I made too much money. I said, "Yeah, right." It's like discretionary funds or something they talk about. I have no idea what discretionary funds are. Or disposable income. I love that when they ask you that. There is no such thing. For in-home support services, while he was living at home with me, he was eligible for in-home support services, but it was a pretty nominal amount. I think he only got 16 hours or 60 hours a month. And when he moved out of my house, he got 283 hours. So that's in-home support services. He gets the max because he's under protective supervision. Protective supervision means that if you left him alone, he would probably not survive by himself. He would not necessarily stay in the building. He might turn on the stove. He might be a danger to himself or others. Okay. So and in California, they pay in-home support service personnel $16.50 an hour. So that's a lot of money, actually, when you need to hire somebody to work for your son or daughter. For housing, we were looking at different housing options. Housing is working with the public housing authorities. It's working with the ARC, who also might be working with agencies to build housing for people with disabilities. Group homes. In California, we're closing all of our institutions by the end of next year. So anyone living in the institutions or any facility over 17, they are moving out into the community. So you go back to the ARC and the money follows the person, and those people who are moving out of the institutions, that money that is used to support them is going to move out into the community with them. When I was advocating for housing for Joseph, I do remember threatening my case manager, and I said, well, you are not going to find me any housing, so I think I'm going to put Joseph in an institution in Sonoma. That was the state hospital. And I said, I'm going to park myself right outside. I'm going to move him in, and he's going to stay there for 30 days, and I'm going to be, camped out in a tent. And then when he moves, the money has to follow the person. Well, the person in the institution is getting $250,000 a month, to be supported in those institutions. That's how expensive it was. And I think Brandon was talking about that earlier, as was the woman from CAP. It's very expensive to live in these institutions, but then I could make the money follow the person. But they didn't think that was a really good idea, so they looked a little harder for housing. The Arc of San Francisco ended up building a 9-apartment building, and it's right down on Fisherman's Wharf. He lives in a 2-bedroom apartment with a personal care attendant who lives in the other bedroom, and he has 24/7 support. And that all has to be managed by someone. It could be me if we went self-determination. I do have an individualized budget for Joseph in California. His budget's about $100,000 a year. And that $100,000 is worthy of all the services that he has that wrap around. And I'm pretty old school here, so I did produce this little map because I go to these conferences all the time and people put their PowerPoints up and I want to write on them, and you never have them. So the little map I made is Joseph in the middle and my cute little heart. This is Computer Knowledge 101. But as you can see, you are trying to, I had to make these choices with Joseph about his life once he turned 21. He moved into his apartment 3 months before his 21st birthday. He's lived there for almost 19 years, and he has a great life. But in doing that, I had to coordinate the in-home support service people and hire those staff. I make sure that any of the in-home support staff, and I think my numbers are on, it says $16 an hour. It was $16, it's going up to $16.50 this month. I have to coordinate the staff that Joseph hires, and by the way, he fires all women, because he moved out, being a woman. I thought nobody's going to be able to take care of my son like I can, so we hired women, and he fired them all. Oh, what? And they said, well, how do you know he's firing them? And I said, he's firing them because he's acting out. He says he doesn't want them. He definitely did not want them doing any personal care. And that's what we ended up determining when we were asking Joseph. And again, this is through my interpretation, working with Joseph and facilitating his communication and his understanding of his life. I am not making these decisions for him. I am not superseding, taking his rights away. So he hired men that worked around him, and they were all his age-ish. He was 20. So these are college students, 20s and 30s. Guys that wanted to work with, and they were totally untrained, off the street, just interested in working with people with disabilities. And I went, well, I'm not going to keep you. So we trained them. I also had them bonded through the Arc of San Francisco, so they could also cross-train, CPR training, the fingerprinting, and all the other stuff that you have to go through. But if anyone doesn't show up on one shift, someone can take over, so the overnight person can cover. And so that was a complicated system to negotiate, but it was doable. We're going to talk about training and hiring of staff later with Kathy, but I won't go on with that. The San Francisco Unified School District was the training, he was in the transition program. You're supposed to write that into your IEP after about 16. A lot of people don't do it till 18. I think it's actually mandated at 14, but every state's a little bit different. But Joseph, when he moved out of my house, was still in that transition program. So the only thing different about Joseph's day when he moved out of my home was his evening, because he still got picked up by the little yellow bus. He went to his transition program, which was a job out in the city. He worked in Golden Gate Park, and he had a couple of other job training experiences that were going on during that time. But then when he finished his day, he went home to his apartment in San Francisco. And that was traumatizing for me, but it worked, and it was a very smooth transition because a lot of his day was still the same. Then I had to make some choices after he got out of school to look at integrated work programs and supported employment programs. And these are, the back of this form also has what the boxes mean, by the way, because I'm probably using acronyms that are familiar to none of you or some of you. But supported employment. Supported employment is a program that is funded by the Department of Rehab and the waiver. And I used that through the ARC San Francisco to find out if that works. Supported employment was a goal of mine. I'll have to be true confessions. I thought I wanted him to be working in a law firm delivering the mail, or cleaning the coffee rooms or something like that. And that was what I had witnessed a lot of people doing. I said, let's see if Joseph can do that. Yeah, well, first of all, he doesn't read, so he wasn't delivering mail. And cleaning, well, actually he did do some coffee rooms at one point, but he never ended up staying as supported employment because he made too much money, and it was really hard to manage the money that he got and then his SSI. And he also has the attention span of a flea. I don't know if anybody understands that, but that is usually what I explain to anyone when I say, okay, well, how long is this job going to take? And they say, well, it's about a 3-hour job. I'm like, yeah. Okay. So we did try some of them. He was on a graffiti patrol for a while, which was more of an integrated work program. That says one-to-one. That's just because Joseph requires one-to-one and has had a one-to-one aide through the school system since age 5th grade. And he was fully included through high school and middle school. And the integrated work program was more of a group work. And we had a program from the ARC San Francisco that he would go out and remove graffiti by painting over it. So we didn't have to paint within the lines, thank God. And he loved, more than anything, he loved the jumpsuit and the reflective vest he got to wear. He just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Didn't like the painting so much, but he'd push that cart for miles. So some of the other guys did the painting. Sometimes he did the painting, but it wasn't the greatest thing in the world. He's done that. He did the unhanging of clothes at Nordstrom, because they take these clothes and they put them and they're going to ship them off somewhere else, and they're all with hangers. I mean, whoever taught those people not to hang things up? But they needed somebody to find the hangers in the clothes, so he is unhanging the clothes. I thought that was a great job. He worked at a food bank, and these programs were actually more of a meaningful volunteerism, and you really have to worry about volunteerism because sometimes volunteerism is tokenism, and it's not really something you want anybody doing. And you certainly don't, cleaning up litter on the side of the freeway, those kind of things. But he was working on a food bank, and he wasn't getting paid for it at all, but he enjoyed it because he was passing out cans of food and filling the boxes for people coming through a line. He had a one-to-one assistant doing that with him, but he was with regular folks sitting in the community doing this. He was with regular people unhanging the clothes also. Those were really cool experiences for him, but again, because he has the attention span of a flea, they have rotated in and out of his life for all of these years. Supported living services and the independent living services were two things that we were looking at. I think I wanted independent living services, which means that somebody kind of just comes in and if you have an individual who needs less support, they can come in and check to make sure you've done some shopping and there's food in the refrigerator, make sure you paid your bills, make sure, and you're doing a little bit more just supervising from afar. It would be a lot of, the technology can do that also with, that Brandon was talking about. And those are independent living skills, services. The supported living services is what Joseph has, which again is 24/7. He has somebody that comes in from 8:30 to about 2:30. Depending on how long or late he sleeps. And to the 8:30 to 2:30, one-to-one, they're going out into the community doing a variety of things when he's not doing the jobs that are for an attention span of a flea. But he belongs to the library and all the museums and the aquarium and any and all of the programs that are available in San Francisco. And he loves riding the cable cars and Muni. He prefers that to my car, as a matter of fact. But he is out in the community, hanging out at his local Starbucks, going to his regular groups of friends, totally with his one-to-one aide, and doing whatever he chooses to do. They have a means of communicating with him on how to determine what we're going to do today, what music we're going to see or hear. I have found that most of the people he hires are very creative, artistic, musical people. The best guy I ever hired was a skateboarder. I mean, this dude was so cool. And he still comes back and forth to see Joseph every now and then, but he just looked at the world differently. And he looked at the world very much like Joseph did. And I've never just seen them just jive so well. It was quite a wonderful relationship to watch bloom. And that was probably one of my best experiences with him. Then, of course, we had Social Security. So I already mentioned that Social Security came through, and they said that, oh, now he's eligible once he turned 18. And oh, no, miracles. He's getting about $790 a month, and that's what he's living on. Now, I mentioned he lives in an apartment, and that's where we get to housing. It's HUD housing, Section 811 housing. And later this afternoon, someone from the Arc of the United States will be speaking about housing, how to get it, where it is. In San Francisco, what we did is we went to the mayor's office. And the Arc of San Francisco went to the mayor's office. Almost every city has a consolidation plan, which is a housing plan that they have to have. I mean, it's just one of the rules. And they've got to have a plan. And in that plan, you must have a certain amount of people, housing for people with disabilities and aging and low income. And in California at the time, Mayor Willie Brown was the mayor. They did not have any people with disabilities included at all. And it was, we said, well, gotcha. So they had to rewrite their plan, and they did incorporate housing for people with disabilities. We tore down a fish market with the city of San Francisco, and we raised $3.5 million and built an apartment building. We applied for Section 8 housing, and they said no. And then after we built the housing, HUD came down and said, oh, we're going to give you Section 811 voucher for this, or no, it's not a voucher. Section 811, you are now deemed Section 811, which meant that Joseph could live there and only have to pay, well, Joseph actually wasn't on the list at the time, but Joseph could live in this apartment. Anyone who lived there did not have to pay more than 1/3 of their Social Security income. And that because of the level of need, his protective supervision determined by IHSS, he also could have a full-time attendant living in the apartment for free. So so this is how I get people to work for Joseph. By the way, you get an apartment in San Francisco at Fisherman's Wharf and you don't have to pay. And they go, oh, that's pretty cool. But by the way, you have to take care of my son. So that's a whole hiring fire we'll get into later. But so Joseph pays $232 a month to live at Fisherman's Wharf in a 2-bedroom apartment. And the rest of his money is his to do as he chooses. And again, I said that I had him conserved when he was 20, 21 years old. I also started a special needs trust at that point, which was just empty. I mean, it's really just a shell, so that when I die and he inherits my millions, or I inherit any money, I can pass it on to him. Now, the ABLE account has just come through, and that wasn't there 20 years ago. But the ABLE account is an opportunity for people with disabilities to save money It's like a college fund, like the 529s that you can do for the rest of your college kids. And you can save money without having it show up on his records as income that will be repossessed for his Medicaid services, because you can't have more than $2,000 that's available to him. So the special needs trust, any money that goes into that is not accessible to him. What's the advantage of having an ABLE account is that he has access to it, but legally there's enough of a legal line that Medicaid's not going to, CMS, they're not going to come back and swoop away his money. That's good. Because part of the reason I had him conserved, part of the reason I had a special needs trust, and as I tell Joseph's team of 7 or so all the time, I'm going to die. And they go, tomorrow? And I said, that may be wishful thinking on your part, but no. But the point is, I am going to die, and I don't trust these agencies to do this map, and manage this without me. I need people, and therefore my special needs trust, my living will is all set up so that there are people that will take over for me to facilitate Joseph's language, to make Joseph's, help him make the decisions he needs to make. When we sat at the regional center office in San Francisco, and we were asking the Golden Gate Regional Center, whose job, by virtue of being a regional center, there's 21 regional centers in California, and their job is to advocate for the 230,000 people with developmental disabilities in California. So they have to say no to my guardianship, conservatorship request. And so they were saying, well, you know, this is our job, we can't do it, this is our mission. And I go, okay. And we sat in this meeting for 2 hours, writing his IPP and going over the issues of conserving him. And the woman, they had a doctor and a psychiatrist and all these people in here. And at the end of the meeting, they said, well, you know, we're going to have to say no. And I said, yeah. And I said, I want to go on the record, because it was being recorded. I just want to go on the record that we sat here for 2 hours and not one of you asked Joseph one question. You didn't ask him if he agreed with this. You didn't ask him if he understood why he was here. You didn't ask him anything. I said, boom, you're done. I said, no judge is going to go with you. And they didn't. And so that is why I do what I do, tell my story, tell Joseph's story, but that is why there's someone else behind me who's going to help manage all of these services. Because it's not simple. The school system was a piece of cake compared to this. Piece of cake. And so as your kids are aging, and you are aging, I mean, I'm looking at Medicare myself. I'm looking at retirement. How many of you families, when somebody says you're retired, you just go, yeah, that's somebody else's dream? I have no idea how I'm ever going to do that. Because I know too many families that have kids with disabilities that live at home with them until their 60s and 70s and 80s. I know families who have had suicide pacts. I know people who move to other states who keep moving in with more family and more family. Joseph's 3 sisters could not be happier that he has the quality of life that he has. And one of his sisters will probably take over for me, but she knows she can. She's a special ed teacher. I don't know where she got that idea. But it's really important that we think of it now. If I hadn't started working with the ARC when Joseph was 3, and planning for him to be 18, and planning for him to eventually be 65, and I won't be here then, it wouldn't have happened. Anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions, and otherwise we'll be back later for more. Where are we on time?
We've got plenty of time for this session, so let's ask some questions. What questions do you have? We do have a mic over there. Mark, could you grab that mic over there?
I've got this one here. Oh,
And
you
we've
want?
got, well, you guys,
Oh,
why don't you
I
guys
see.
each
There's one
use
here.
one there so that you can answer, but we do have a roving mic here.
Okay.
So if you've got a question, want to try to answer that, we've got one right over here. Just throw it really hard. And just chuck it over there.
He's an IT guy, he can't do that.
So he's an IT guy, he can't do that.
can't do
Fair
that.
enough.
I would do it. I would throw it.
I would not, I hit someone.
Oh, the others.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Robin Clark. I have a daughter that's 27. And I was wondering
And what
about...
state are you in?
We're in the state of Virginia.
Okay.
And I was wondering about the ABLE account, how you would set that up, or what's the process for setting that up? I've never heard of that.
Do you know how to do that?
Do you?
Yeah.
You can take it.
Well, actually, if you just Google it, wherever you are, again, I'm going to go back to Brandon's Googling it. It means Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, ABLE.
ABLE.
And every state has to be developing an ABLE account plan.
Right.
And many of them are way behind. You do not have to use the one in your state.
Okay.
California, it took forever to get theirs going. I think they just got it up this April, and many people, New Jersey was one of the first ones and is very good. And you can do it in other states, so just go and Google that.
Okay.
And they will help you set up your accounts. It does not matter, because it's bank, and
Right.
it could be wherever. It doesn't have to be in Kentucky or West Virginia.
I mean, we were always told we had to spend down her...
Correct.
...checking account. It could never get above...
Correct.
Then you'd get the audit, and then you'd have to go in.
Right.
Can you put excess funds from the SSI into that account?
Yes.
Wow.
So Virginia is able-now.com.
Thank you.
able-now.com.
All right, thanks.
ABLE accounts, one of the things, thank you. I don't know. One of the things about the ABLE accounts, I don't know about if this is a situation other parents run into, but we run into this situation where people don't know, our relatives don't know what to give our kids for their birthdays. You know, Amanda's 28, my youngest is 18 years old. You know, you can only buy so many toys, and ABLE accounts are a great way to link it to any of your social media, give that address, you know, the Google address to your parents and say, look, this is an account just for them. Explain to your family members and your friends that those funds don't count against your child's supports and services, and they have access to it.
Excellent.
It's a great Christmas present, birthday present.
That's excellent. How many of you, this is the first time you've ever heard of ABLE accounts? Wow. So
It just
again-
passed, though. That's because, it really,
Yeah,
they've been
it
trying
is
to pass
very-
it for 5 years.
That's right.
And so it
Yeah.
did, but it is huge.
Yeah, but again, this is why it's so important to advocate and to communicate. This is why it's important to be connected and aware of things. Go ahead.
But, correct me if I'm wrong, but one fine point with the ABLE account that I understand is any remainder in money left in the account when that individual dies goes back to the state.
Right, so you just
Right.
have to make sure that you plan for that when, there's a way of doing that remainder amount of money, and how it's dealt with by writing it in. I'm not privy to that right now because I'm doing the special needs trust, but because Joseph would have access to the ABLE account, I'm thinking of actually doing both, which a lot of families are doing.
Yeah.
But also, when you have a special needs trust, you have to make sure that the money's being left to the trust. If, like, when my dad dies, I said, don't leave Joseph any money, don't just leave it to his trust, and that way he won't ever touch it. That's an important fine line. But yeah, the remainder is, but that's why you keep the 529, there is a way of dealing with that remainder trust, and I'd have to investigate it. But again, just Google what you need to know about it and contact your local ARC, or the ARC US has a whole thing on the ABLE Act, the ARC US website, which is thearc.org. and they would be able to answer your questions about the remainder trust. The National Council on Elder Laws that Sherry was talking about also deal with special needs trust and the ABLE account. So a lot of those, the attorneys you might go to who are setting up conservatorships or special needs trusts or living wills also are doing the ABLE Act now. So they would be able to tell you what to do.
We have a special needs trust through the Arc of Indiana Master Trust.
Oh, right.
And so you can have, and that one, any remainder in goes to who we choose. Who we choose to. So we chose any remainder, and part of it goes to two different sisters, part of it goes back into the ARC fund, and part of it might go to Easter Seals or Angelman Syndrome or whoever you want it to go to, whatever's left. So you can have a special needs trust, like the ARC trust, and an ABLE trust as well?
Yes, I wasn't sure why I would have to do that, but it's actually access to the funds, because when you're in a pooled trust like you are, you don't have access to the funds, and if you have a 529 or the ABLE Act, you actually have access to the funds more immediately, like for, and so I think that was the biggest reason many people have suggested doing both. But you have to figure out what you want to do and who's making those decisions.
Yes, I think there's opportunities to connect with organizations that can give more advice on this. There's opportunities to connect with lawyers who are aware of special needs trusts and things of that nature. Financial planners. If you were here Wednesday, what's today, Friday? If you were here Wednesday, Gordon Holmes was out there, and Gordon Holmes is a financial planner who has become a specialist with issues regarding IDDD, and he kind of works this region, but there are plenty of those individuals around in different areas, and are really good at trying to help, kind of advise on these different tools. Right in the back.
Hi, good morning. My name is John. I'm from California. I had never heard of these ABLE accounts as well, but just looking at CalABLE, it's a California ABLE website, it does say that you can save as much as $100,000 in the account with no effect on federal and California state benefits. And also, to answer this lady's question, it says California residents are protected from both creditors and repayment of medical assistance. Medi-Cal is prohibited from filing a claim against an account after the beneficiary has died, giving individuals full opportunity to leave a legacy for loved ones. So it sounds like they can roll over those funds that were left over.
Good. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Okay, I think I'm going to go home and get my hair cut like you and get glasses, because you're legit, man. Don't mess with me. Yeah. I was like, I think I'm going to do that, so when I go in and mess with I'll look like you. I love what you said. You were great. Our daughter is 21. She's just finished school, and I'm absolutely terrified. I'm really feeling like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Because it seems like, you're right, school was a piece of cake. I was going to cry. So when I'm trying to find someone to help, would you suggest the ARC over social services? If I were going to try to find somebody to help me, would it be best to go with ARC first?
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record and tell you to Google whoever you want to get in contact with. What state are you in?
Nebraska.
Nebraska.
And we've had ABLE for 5 years, I think. I mean, she hasn't gotten it, but it's been in the state for a long time.
Right. I don't even know about the ARC of Nebraska off the top of my head, but I would certainly put you in connection with them. You go to your state council is usually your first touchstone, because every state is required to have a state council, and I think that's what Kathy was talking about. From there, you can also go to the Department of Mental Health, the Department of Behavioral Sciences. I would go to a USED, which is a university that does training for people with doctors. UCSF UCSF is a USAID, so these are university centers that have doctors and that specialize in people with developmental disabilities. I've worked with many of those at UCSF, teaching physicians how to understand how to diagnose people with disabilities in their practice, et cetera, and so forth. Those are the hubs that you would start touchstoning with. And again, because of every state is different, you just have to hope that that's what they're doing, but they are required to have a state council. And so that is a must, and they have a state plan. If you're in the school system, you should talk to their transitioning people. Our transition programs weren't doing much of anything before we got in there, and we started making them work with service providers in the adult world, so that facilitated that kind of transition. DRC, or Protection and Advocacy, DRC is Disability Rights California. You might have a DRN, Disability Rights Nebraska. They also are federally mandated agencies that advocate for people with disabilities, and they would be able to put you in touch with whomever, and you can always call me. And my number is, by the way, on the page that you have here. So you can call me.
Everybody has a caseworker then? Like,
Well-
when Karis comes in to, do we have an appointed caseworker or not necessarily?
State councils don't provide case management. They are an agency required to, they're kind of a watchdog for the legislature. They're also an education for the community. They usually have regional offices throughout a state. They provide a lot of programs for education for families. Kathy, do you have anything to add to that?
As far as looking for programs for your daughter, call everybody. You know what, we are great detectives. We are parents, we are caregivers of people that have Angelman syndrome. We learned at a very early age in our children's lives, turn over every leaf you possibly can, because you're going to call like the DD council and you're going to get told one thing.
Oh my
You're
word.
going to get, you're
Yeah.
going to call your parent training and information center and get told something else.
Yeah.
And it's a puzzle that you have to put together the pieces. So even if you don't think it might not get you anywhere, call anyway.
Yeah, I have to gear myself up for that, though, because it's just so overwhelming. And so, like, when you call somebody and you get one answer, you call someone else, they tell you
Right.
something else, and then you're like, what's going on? And I feel like really kind of lost in that process at the moment.
You live in Nebraska?
Yeah. And we've
Okay.
had good supports. I mean, I don't think the school did a great job of transitioning us into what's out there. They did have one meeting, and when we got halfway through, I looked around and I'm like, why are all these people all working for the same place and nobody knows what the other one's doing? But, you know, that's just the process of, so I might call you, yeah.
I just think that you need an advocate. As many years as I've been doing this, I've told so many families, or anyone, if you go to the doctors, you should not go by yourself. You know, any one of us in this room. And so if you're going through this complicated a system, I mean, this is complicated. So don't go by yourself. You need to hear yourself asking the question and getting the answer, and then asking the next question. And so whether it's not that different state to state, the resources are similar. They're just they go by different names, and that's how it becomes smoke and mirrors. But if you have someone who helps you ask the right questions, you're going to get the right answer. When I found out that Joseph was a waiver kid at 18, I sat there and looked at my case manager and I said, so he's been a waiver kid like for all of his life, so why didn't you tell me that? I said, well, we didn't really care because we weren't paying for it then. But now that he's 18, we're paying for it, so it makes a difference, so you need to know. And that's why I started figuring out which of the programs are federally matched programs. And I sat in a legislative meeting once and I said, well, if I had moved Joseph up to the state institution, or I had taken him off the waiver, that was my big threat. I said, I'm going to take him off the waiver, just voluntarily, I'm taking him off the waiver. But because we have the Landerman Act in California, that entitlement law, they would have had to pay the entire bill. So all of the programs that are split federally with your state, they would have had to pay the whole thing, and they said, "Oh, don't do that, Pat." Anyway, yeah, I don't know that I ever would have done that, but it was a really good threat. And it made a big difference for making the point that I'm saving you half of this by doing it, so just do it right.
Mark, you're going to say something?
Matt.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Kathy's husband and actually stepdad to the 3 angels that she has. Her husband died just before I came into the picture. But I have witnessed, I wanted to say, first of all, you don't have to change your hair. You're beautiful like you are. Let me tell you, that beautiful redhead sitting next to her is scary as hell when it comes to her kids. Everybody in this room has to be. You got to put on your big boy pants, and you got to knock down doctors. Every single one of us, in order to get this diagnosis, has known that. You have to tell doctors what to do. You have to tell case manager. You have to be the advocate for your kids, and you have to get scary sometimes. You know, you be nice, you be kind, you be professional, you be diplomatic, but then, if you're still not doing what you're supposed to, there are a lot of things that you have to do, and I wanted to answer the first question I heard this morning about where do you get services and things like that. And you got 4 different answers, and the one was Google. I understand where he's coming from. I do that. But I know when I'm doing that, I'm inventing the wheel, and you want a master buggy maker, okay? These people up here are master buggy makers. They've lived it, they've done it, they're the old dogs. Look to them. Look for people like this. The answer to your question is, you're already doing it. This is the place to get connected with people, find out where to get started, who to look to. Look online on your message groups for AS, and there's all kinds of resources out here for people to connect together. Talk to the old dogs who have been through it. Talk to the ones who have sat here time after time after time and figured out, this is the way I have to do this. I have to trick you into doing this. Kathy has taught me something very, very important about all of this with services. You have to understand their language. Right. If you don't say the right buzzwords, and that's what we're going to help you with these sessions today, is we're going to tell you some of these buzzwords. Self-determination is one of those buzzwords. If you don't say the right buzzword, you don't get services, because Pat's right. As soon as you ask for services, they get all tight-fisted, and they're like, I don't want to spend my money on you. And Kathy even was told, we don't do this. She had to find somebody at a bank at random to be able to get her into the services that she got in the first place. And then you have to add to them and learn. 18 years later, you learn, oh, I was eligible for this all the time, but now, you have to work at this stuff. You have to learn the buzzwords, but more than anything, connect with everybody here, connect with people online, keep connecting with network of people older than you and longer than you've been in this. They will tell you every state is different, but every state is also similar. This is federally started. Keep adding to your network until you get there. Don't stop. Don't stop.
You don't have to do it alone. That's the most important thing to know.
We want to help
And
you.
you should not do it alone. And I resent being called an old dog. You just called your wife an old dog.
Yeah, he meant that old dog term figuratively. That was not a direct term. Matt, I'm going to pray for you on that.
Thank
I think
you.
You're in trouble. I think this idea of networking relationships is so key. Finding that agency that you trust, or that counsel, finding somebody that you think really has your best interest, really working with them, developing a strong relationship with them, being able to ask those questions of them, having that open line of communication. And it's challenging because a lot of the agencies and organizations that we work with, those people are overwhelmed. There was a story on our local news over the last couple of days talking about it was in the foster care system, and talking about the overwhelmed caseworkers and things like that. So we really do have to take that primary responsibility of advocacy, but we also then have to build this network of relationships with those that we know that we can draw on and trust. And that's one of the things, let me just say, and I'm not trying to be a homer for ASF, but I'm encouraged by what we're doing here today. I'm encouraged by the focus groups that have been going on. I'm encouraged by a step in the direction for ASF to really say, we want to start trying to be a clearinghouse for information. We want to be a place where you can go and ask questions, and that they can help us to find those things. It's a great step in the right direction for sure. So, okay. Yes.
I'm Jennifer Ferguson. I'm from Michigan. I have a 19-year-old. I have a couple of questions. One of them is when I'm applying for SSI for my son, we were told about the $2,000 limit on any monies coming in. And I'm wondering, with the self-supported living, Kathy, I believe your children are in their own home. Is that a home that is in their name, or is it in the trust name? How did you handle that?
Currently, it is in my name. It is not in their name yet. My youngest just turned 18, so I was kind of waiting to transition all of that until Rocky turned 18. But yeah, they live in technically my house with 24-hour support staff. So.
And will the home be put in their name or in the name of a trust? How
In the
will
name
they-
of a trust.
Okay. And then, Pat, you mentioned that you had $100,000 for your son per year. Does that include, and you said that his housing was only a third of his SSI. Does the $100,000 include his support staff that's living there paying for their services over the 24-hour period each day?
Right. In California, we have to be sent a budget of what the services cost the state. And so you get an annual statement of what it costs for Joseph's staff. And that would include both the IHSS and the ARC staff that are paid, I think they're minimum wage, and so it's $15.50 or something like that an hour. And so that whole service in one big old ball is about $100,000. 90 plus, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Central California, which is nearby Visalia. I'm not sure if you know the area. My daughter belongs to Regional Center, which is Visalia, mothership of Fresno. She's 14 years old, and every year the Regional Center send me toothbrush in order to be in the Regional Center. And then I say, you send me a toothbrush every year, why? And she told me that in order to be in Regional Center, we have to have some sort of expense. But Brianna, being under 18, she have no expenses because you have to take care of her. All the expenses should come from you. And we'll pay all the expenses when she turned 18. But I know other parents get their expenses paid. But my problem is not just because Brianna gets toothbrush, but I want her to be in a self-determination model, and with that, my baseline is toothbrush. So I don't know how I'll go about toothbrush to the, goal ticket, because it's just too big of a gap. So that's my problem, and I need to make that happen. I think our pilot program for the self-determination is 3 years, and I need to get to that gold ticket in 3 years. So I have to drive fast, and I don't know how to do about it. And do I contact Art for that to help me to get to that? Because I want to get to where you are.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm a dental hygienist by trade, FYI. So that the toothbrush thing is really ironic. I would tell you what to do with that toothbrush. And I would take it to my next IPP meeting. And let me tell you, they will never talk to you again that way. First of all, your IPP meeting would talk about, it's true under our Lanterman Act, the entitlement law, they do not have to pay for anything that another agency is responsible for. Therefore, if the school district is paying for schooling, that's why there's no bill. But if you get respite, I had respite for Joseph, I had in-house respite, I had out-of-home respite, I had camping. They don't do camping in California anymore, apparently. And I had music therapy for years for Joseph, but those were not covered by the school district. I had to fight to get those in his IPP, but they paid for those. So by the time he turned 18, they had been paying for services. They had to, because I was able to tell them the school district doesn't cover music therapy. And of course, they tried to tell me that music therapy was really speech therapy, and I said, no. And so we got them to pay for years of music therapy. The respite was something that was covered by them as well. And so I don't know what services you get or are not getting and what they're telling you you can't get. But in California, there's 245 coded services that are supposed to be listed on their regional center website. Again, go to their website and you can see what those services are. I would go to the ARC Fresno. Lori Ramirez is the executive director there. She's a good friend of mine. You tell her I sent you, and she will take care of you.
Lori
Lori Ramirez.
Can you write that down?
Write that down. And I could probably pull up her phone number for you on my phone when I get back to my seat. By the way, somebody lost a phone up here, so if anybody sees Brandon or Sherry, I think his phone got dropped out of his pocket.
Thank you.
Okay.
So buckle up, Lori. She's coming with her toothbrush. All right. Is it a short one?
Yeah, short. So I'm in Maine, and I have, my daughter is 21, and she's deletion positive, and a lot of the things that you have talked about, my daughter is pretty low functioning. And so I'm wondering, when you're talking about having someone live with them and having them be in their own place and whatever, how do you know, I don't know if there's, communication or whatever, how do you know whether things are going okay in the household, not going okay in the household, whether the needs are being taken care of without any or with very little eyes on?
Well, we have cameras that we can look at on our phones. And one of the cameras have audio so we can hear what's going on. How do we know their needs are being met? My kids can answer questions by shaking their head no or nodding their head yes. So all we have to do is ask them, and they answer us. But before they could do that, how did I know their needs were being met? Because they've been under the self-determination model for a really long time. I think Amanda was 10 when we started it. She's now 28. Okay. I'll be quite honest with you. I did this with school, and I did this with support staff. I would leave the house, and they would assume I would be gone for a couple hours, and I would pop back in 20 minutes. I did pop-in visits. I surprised them. I never did it on a routine. I could pop in an hour after I left and then not come back for 5 hours. Other times, I was just up the street, and I would come home once an hour. I never told them when I would be home. They knew at any time I could walk in, my husband could walk in, my sister could walk in. You don't want to face providers with the mentality that they always have to be on their toes, because that makes for an uncomfortable working environment. They also have to have in the forefront in their mind that they need to know that my children's care is my best interest, my children's best interest, and while they're in my home, it better be their best interest. So I know that sounds harsh, and I don't mean to sound like that, but it's the way it is. There, one time with my youngest daughter, because she's the one that doesn't communicate the greatest, she started getting rashes in her brief area, and that was unusual. I knew she wasn't being changed. So there's just signs that you can look for. You can tell if your child is eating, drinking. I want to say that every time my children have not been taken care of, I could tell. I could tell.
Even in the lowest physical condition, you could tell their medical, their physical, and their emotional well-being just by, being around them, talking to them, acting with them, looking for things. They tell you. They tell you. And their behaviors always tell you too. And if that doesn't work, she got caught creeping, looking in the school window one day just to make sure that the school was doing right. You know, told you she's scary.
I think some of this will come up with the caregivers discussion, which is next as well.
Yeah, I agree. We don't have cameras, but we all have a monthly team meeting that they are paid for to come to from wherever they are, because they aren't working for Joseph 24/7. And they are paid 1 hour a month to be at that team meeting, which is their support group. The biggest problem I have found with Joseph living on his own is actually the staff feel very isolated. They don't get support. They need, and they don't need me on them all the time. And I try and do my best when we were the first trainers. Now they train themselves. But you can tell when Joseph is not hydrated enough, when his allergies are acting up, when he doesn't feel well, they call me. Joe's doing this, or he's doing that, or his seizures, which don't come up as often as they used to. They call, and I'm on it. But they have a team leader they're supposed to call first, and they do, and then I'm the backup plan, because I'm planning on dying at some point, so somebody needs to be answering those questions before me, because I need to trust that that person knows the right answer. Joseph is a huge choking risk, and it has, every person on his team has done the Heimlich on him. They have all had to know how to, they're all certified CPR. Those are important to me because I've had to do the Heimlich on him at home. So it's just the way he eats and the way he's not supposed to eat, and et cetera and so forth. But those are the things that you know instinctively. And again, I think someone was talking about the dignity of risk or calculated risks. We know what we're doing, and spying is what moms do really well. So I did it at school too. Joseph had a job when he was in high school. I said he was fully included. In the cafeteria, he was cleaning the cafeteria tables. I mean, Angelman kids love water, right? So I said, okay, we're giving him a job with a bucket and sponge. Are you kidding me? And he cleaned the tables, and he took the garbage out of the building, the big black garbage bag, out to the dumpster. And I was spying on him, because if he saw me, he would have lost it and the whole thing would have been broken. But I watched him grab the plastic bag, and I go, he's leaving the building and there is no one around. His aide was there, but shadowing him as far away as I was. And he grabbed that bag, he walked all the way out to the dumpster, threw it in the dumpster, came back and looked around, and I go, oh, is he going to make a run for it? Is he going to make a run for it? And he didn't, and all he did was go like this.
That's awesome.
And that was his good job. He knew he did a good job, and there was nobody to tell him but him. I cried. It was great. So that was pretty cool.
We also have a medical book at home. This is something new within the last few months we implemented. Providers are documenting what the kids eat, if they eat well, if they see any bruises, if they see any scratches or unexplainable marks, So we know if somebody comes to us and says, look, this bruise wasn't on Angela's right thigh, yesterday, how did it happen? We're going to look back and see who was working the previous day and ask that person. So they're not scared of us, but they know that they're accountable to us.
Okay, so we're a little past our time on this session, so this is what we're going to